911. What is the address of your emergency?
Oh my gosh! What is that shooting?
I need you to tell me what is going on. Do you know who it was that did this?
It's that stupid shit!
In a rugged Colorado town, a real-life fatal attraction played out with tragic results. In an unusual twist, everyone involved was law enforcement or married to it. Police found themselves investigating one of their own, someone accused of the execution-style murder of a police officer's wife.
Greeley is a largely rural agricultural town about an hour north of Denver.
It's very working class, very blue collar. Folks there work hard.
We also are a university town with the University of Northern Colorado, so kind of multifaceted, but it was probably under 100,000 people at that point in time.
Shawna Nelson was a dispatcher with the Greeley Police Department. I had worked several years with her as my dispatcher, as a street officer. She was an excellent dispatcher.
Shawna Nelson's husband, Ken Nelson, worked for the sheriff's department.
Shawna Nelson was known within the department as being someone who had extramarital affairs, and most notoriously was that with Ed Garis, a police officer with the Greeley Police Department. Ed Garis was married to Heather Garis. She worked as a manager within the credit union. The two of them had an 8-year-old daughter, Victoria.
Heather Garis was the one true innocent party in this case. She was well respected at the credit union where she worked. Her friends speak highly of her, affectionately of her. She was oblivious, or for a long period of time, as to the relationship between Ignacio, her husband, and Shawna Nelson, when most folks around her seemed to know what was going on.
Just after 6 o'clock, about 6:14, Heather Garis and her coworkers are leaving work for the night.
A group of us were leaving the credit union. As we got closer to the parking lot, I saw someone dressed in all black, in a black robe, black mask. The person pointed out Heather. It was you, get down. You ruined my life, the person yelled at. And then 2 shots were fired. Then the person took off running down the alley.
There was an innocent woman who was murdered horribly. In fact, they described it as almost a public execution, what they used to do back in the old days, on your knees and shot in the back of the head.
911. What is the address of your emergency?
Oh my gosh! What is that shooting?
I need you to tell me what is going on. Where is the person that was shot?
On the ground!
Is it male or female?
Female! Heather Garraus, her husband, the cop.
Do you know who it was that did this?
It's that stupid shit!
Okay, we have
Right off the bat, they were telling the police, well, we know exactly who this was. This was Shawna Nelson.
Those co-workers who knew Shawna Nelson and knew that Shawna had an ongoing affair with Heather's husband, though they could not see the face, they all pretty much in unison believed it was Shawna Nelson.
Shawna Nelson's husband is Ken Nelson. That evening, Ken is at the Weld County Drug Task Force. They have the police radio on inside the office and actually hear this dispatch call for this shooting at the credit union. Our victim is Heather Garis. Our suspect is Shawna Nelson. He's wanting to get home and check on his kids. The sergeant goes with him.
What were you thinking? At approximately 6:30, Shawna Nelson was stopped by her husband, Ken Nelson, along with his sergeant, as she was driving Ken Nelson's truck back towards the Nelson residence.
Underneath the front passenger seat of that truck is a black sheen cloak-style mask that very much matches the witnesses' accounts from the credit union parking lot that evening.
So you know
you know what the game is. So I got to be straight with you. Shauna, we have you at that shooting scene. We have you identified at the shooting scene, and I got to talk to you now. We got to get beyond wasn't there. I got to have an explanation as to what happened.
Greg, I don't know, Greg.
In a lot of cases, we have to build some rapport with somebody we don't know, that they don't know us. That was out the window in this situation. I had worked with her since 1997. So we're 10 years on the job together at this point.
I need to talk to you about some explanation here of what happened tonight. This isn't you. I've known you well enough to not think twice about putting my kids in your care, not putting any of my life in your care on the streets.
I know.
I've had a trusting relationship with you, and I know
Forever.
And I know who you are and what you're about. And whatever happened tonight is not Shawna Nelson that I know. But what I have from you is some dialogue here. I've got to have some explanation as to what happened.
I don't know what to say.
In an interrogation, that most people will eventually confess, or they will make up a lie, and then the detective confronts them. And she didn't do that. She had the wherewithal to just not say anything.
Do you know who the victim is in this?
I don't know.
It's Heather. Before this gets out of hand, you've got to communicate with me.
Well, it kind of seems like it is out of hand. I don't know what to say.
What took you down there?
I wasn't there. Greg, you were a good friend to me, but I don't know what else to say. Well, I guess you better get me an attorney. I don't know what else to do. I don't know, Greg.
Okay. I got these guys on here so I can leave the room
No,
here
that's
for a minute,
okay.
okay?
I believe she thought that since she was married to a police officer, since she dealt with police officers, I think she believed they were going to give her a break. I'm in law enforcement. I couldn't have possibly done something like this. I don't know who did, but it certainly wasn't me.
Sure. Here.
No way.
If you read the affidavits and if you followed the case, it did almost read like a Hollywood script in that it was a love triangle. And the fact that the main players were law enforcement was sort of that twist that I think made the national media take interest.
You may be seated. Good afternoon, members of the jury.
This would be probably the biggest case with the most sort of bizarre set of circumstances that I had in my career.
At this time, the prosecution may give its opening statement.
You're the one I want. You ruined my life. Get on the ground. Heather Garis heard those words moments before 2 bullets ripped through her head. January 23rd, 2007 seemed like a normal day. Heather Garis went to work where she worked for over a decade at Colorado State Employees Credit Union, in Colorado. She got off work with fellow employees that you'll hear from. As they walk in a loose group, they kind of joke around, friends do, employees do. But they saw something. They saw a figure dressed from head to toe in black, and a figure with a black hood. Within 15 minutes, the defendant was found driving her husband's truck with a mask underneath the seat. With this mask, with this black hood, with this red frame, that the defendant's DNA was in this mask, found under her seat.
You're going to hear a lot of speculation, a lot of finger pointing of people saying that Shawna Nelson committed this crime. But that's not true. The district attorney talked about this mask, and what he told you is that Ms. Nelson's DNA is on this mask. Yes, it is. You know whose DNA is not on this? It's Heather Garis' DNA. There was no physical evidence No hard and fast physical evidence linking Ms. Nelson to this crime.
I want you to take a look at People's Exhibits 15 and 16. The message in there is addressed to somebody.
It's to my wife's cell phone again. It's anytime, anywhere, bitch.
One of the most anticipated witnesses in Shawna Nelson's murder trial was the man in the middle of the love triangle that left Heather Garis dead. Police officer Ignacio Ed Garis was not only Shawna Nelson's lover, but was also married to the victim. Now under oath, Officer Garis was about to reveal the most painful and intimate details of his personal life.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at the photograph being projected behind you. People's Exhibit 9. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, it's my wife.
The two of you have any children?
Yes.
How many?
One.
And what is her name?
Victoria Shea Garris.
And how old is she now?
V's 10.
You say V is that your
Victoria,
nickname?
yes.
Going back to January 23rd, 2007, at some point in time, did you go to the hospital?
They had a sergeant with the police department, a friend of mine, loaded Victoria and I up and took us to Northern Colorado Medical Center.
How did you find out about the status of your wife?
Being a police officer, I knew the back door code to the ER. I knew where the trauma room was. And a doctor that's a friend of mine was treating Heather, and he blocked my entrance into the trauma room.
Did you find out?
He told me Heather was dead.
What did you tell your daughter?
Victoria was left outside in the patrol car. As soon as I found out, I left the trauma room. I grabbed Victoria from the car. I said, Victoria, Mommy's dead.
Ignacio Garis was a philanderer. He cheated on his wife, so the jury wasn't going to particularly like him, and quite frankly, I didn't care.
Let's talk about Shawna Nelson.
Yes.
And at some point in time, did the two of you begin an affair?
Yes.
Do you remember approximately how long before the murder this affair began?
I believe just under 3 years.
At some point in time, did she become pregnant with your child?
Yes.
Shawna Nelson actually became pregnant twice, and the first time had an abortion, and then the second time she had the baby, and her husband, Ken Nelson, agreed to raise the child. This was one of the worst kept secrets in the community, and really the only person who was unaware when a lot of this was happening was, unfortunately, Heather.
On the evening of December 16th of 2006, did you have a conversation with your wife?
Yes, she confronted me.
And did you tell her about this affair?
I told her everything. Said, Heather, I've been having an affair with Shauna. The baby is mine. Fairly positive it was mine.
Okay.
And it's all out there. Here you go. I mean...
What was her reaction?
Obviously, she was incredibly upset with me.
By all accounts, Heather was a hardworking mom who was willing to overlook her husband's infidelities just to keep the family together.
And did you and your wife speak about your marriage and the future of that marriage?
Yes, extensively. Under certain conditions, we were going to reconcile.
You're going to reconcile? Well, what conditions did you have to follow?
Terminate my relationship with Shauna.
There were a series of events that I think set Shawna Nelson in motion. The final event was probably, in December of 2006 when Heather Garis decided she was going to stay with Ignacio, and they informed Shawna Nelson to have no more contact. I think that was sort of the final straw.
After you broke off the relationship with the defendant, did you receive any text messages from her?
Yes.
And can you read the message in People's Exhibit 13?
My loyalty is gone. I loved and trusted you, and you me. Be prepared.
Those communications that Shauna made to Heather were key to sort of show motive, which is always a key factor for a jury.
People's Exhibit 14, do you recognize that?
Yes. Yes, that's one that was initially sent to my wife's phone. It's a photo of the baby Christian, and it's got a title under it that says Ig's Flesh and Blood. So it's a picture of the child with Ig's Flesh and Blood under it. It was sent to my wife's phone.
Okay. During your relationship with the defendant, did she tell you that she was on birth control?
Yes.
But she got pregnant?
She got pregnant twice on birth control.
It is not uncommon for individuals who have stalkerish tendencies to try and trap their partner into a relationship. A lot of times that involves getting pregnant for women and having a baby.
I want you to take a look at People's Exhibits 15 and 16. The message in there, is it addressed to somebody?
It's directed to my wife, Heather. It says, Heather, if you're reading this, you're a psycho bitch.
And what does the next one say?
It's to my wife's cell phone again. It's anytime, anywhere, bitch.
Ignacio Garis had hired counsel, and there was a letter written by counsel to Shawna Nelson informing her also that she should have no contact with Ignacio Garis or Heather Garis.
Would you please read the final reply from the defendant to you?
I just wanted to make sure that signing away any parental rights was really what you wanted to do. I'm dead inside from all that has happened anyway. I wish you the best and hope you can be happy. I am now living every day in hell. Take care of yourself, and I know that I will always love you. Bye.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garris.
Shawna Nelson knew that she would never be able to have Ig to herself as long as Heather was still alive.
That day we had a conversation. She had told me that, well, I could just shoot her.
No doubt Shawna Nelson was the leading lady of her own murder trial. But she was nearly upstaged by her best friend, Michelle Moore, who was a former sheriff's deputy. As part of a plea deal, Michelle Moore admitted to being a sounding board for Shawna Nelson's plans. Michelle also was about to reveal to the jury that she gave Shawna Nelson advice on how to quite literally get away with murder.
People would call Michelle Moore to the stand. Box, the judge will give you an answer before you sit down.
Ms. Moore, if you raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear?
Michelle Moore was a former Weld County Sheriff's deputy who was the best friend of Shawna Nelson. They were known to be pretty much inseparable. She had given multiple interviews where she had lied. Please state your name.
Michelle Moore.
Detective Tharp continued to reach out to her and try and get her to come clean and tell us exactly what she knew. And ultimately, she did. Did the defendant ever express her feelings about Ignacio Garis's wife, Heather Garis?
Yes. She believed that Heather had talked him into staying in the marriage. She believed that Ig didn't want to, but Heather talked him into it. And so she focused her anger at Heather.
Do you recall an incident, conversation you had with the defendant in a vehicle at a Walmart in Greeley?
Yes, sir. That day, she was very angry about the situation, and we had a conversation. She had told me that, well, I could just shoot her.
Could she elaborate how that might take place?
Yes, sir. She had said that she could just drive down to the credit union where she worked, and she could just shoot her.
Michelle Moore was, quite frankly, attractive. I know she came from a very strict religious background. She tried to tell the story that she too was a victim, that somehow she was manipulated by Shauna.
Did you have follow-up conversations?
I believe she was utilizing the fact that I was in law enforcement and she watched CSI all the time and things like that. And she would engage me in different scenarios and circumstances and ask me questions about crimes and murders and what to do, what not to do.
What was most shocking to me was that Michelle Moore, being a former law enforcement officer, would engage in those conversations and not realize that Shawna Nelson was serious. This was not idle chatter.
She had asked about evidence, and when she would ask about things like that, I told her at one point that you'd have, the person would have to disguise themselves. We had talked about like DNA or, things from your skin being left unseen, and so I had said that you would have to probably wear gloves, and you have to be completely covered up.
Was there any discussion regarding vehicles?
Yes, sir. She had said she couldn't use her own vehicle. Then she said there's always Ken's truck.
Somebody who is engaging in these stalker-like activities, Shauna, then pulls her friend Michelle into it, which is not typical for a stalker. Usually stalkers work alone.
If in fact she were to use a gun, did she indicate what she would do with it afterwards?
She said she would find a trash can somewhere where nobody looked.
The murder was actually slotted to have occurred on January 22nd, the night before the murder.
Tell the jury about what you recall occurring on January 22nd, 2007. When did you first see the defendant?
She picked me up in Ken's truck, and then we went to Starbucks on 11th Avenue. She handed me a small baggie that had some crushed up substance in it. She said it was Ambien, and she asked me to put it in Ken's coffee.
Shauna tells her it's Ambien, prescription sleep aid. She says, I want Ken to be out cold. We get home, your job is to just take care of the kids. If anybody comes asking, I'm in the bathroom taking a bath. So she's pulled Michelle Moore into this plan to commit the murder that night. She's going to be there at the house watching the children.
What do you recall happening next while you were at the Nelson residence?
She had come out from whatever she was doing, and I believe she dumped Ken's coffee down the drain. And then she had told me privately, she said, well, she's not where she's supposed to be.
And who did you believe she was referring to?
Heather.
Shauna calls off the plans to commit the murder on the night of the 22nd. Looking at Shauna's phone records in that exact time frame that Michelle's describing, we find a series of about 5 or 6 phone calls that Shauna makes to various extensions within the credit union, presumably trying to find out if Heather's at work. Heather took a sick day that day. She had a headache, went home, was actually spending time with the husband and the child.
Shauna and I decided to go to Jackson's Hole, a sports bar. She was very upset about Ig being with Heather. She had said that she just had to get rid of her. She had to do it, that she was in hell, and she didn't want to live like this anymore.
Did she indicate a time frame when she was going to get rid of Heather?
She then said to me, she said, if you get a phone call from me tomorrow saying I'm taking a bath, then you know I did it.
The next day, January 23rd, did you receive any messages from the defendant?
Yes, sir. I got a voicemail from Shauna, and the voicemail said that she was going to relax and just take a bath.
So Michelle's now left with this voicemail, and she's been told what the significance of that phone message is. And Michelle sits quietly for the next 3 hours, doesn't pick up a phone, make any anonymous report, and Heather Garis is dead 3 hours later.
Did you actually see Heather Garis get shot?
Yes. She was on her knees with her hands up, looking at me.
It was right out of a slasher movie. In the execution-style murder of Heather Garis, the killer was shrouded by a Grim Reaper Halloween costume. The prosecution needed to prove Shawna Nelson was the assailant inside that costume and link her to the crime scene. It would seem an impossible task, but it really wasn't. thanks to the fast-acting police, forensic evidence, and incredibly observant witnesses.
How close were you to Heather Garis when this person was pointing the gun at her?
Approximately 4 feeters.
Did you actually see Heather Garis get shot?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what she was doing immediately prior to her assailant shooting her?
She was on her knees, looking at me.
It was horribly sad. Her coworkers, they loved her. They just thought she was the greatest thing on earth. She would help everybody.
After the 2 shots went off, the shooter left the scene the exact way she came back behind into the alley. She was jogging/running like a heavy-set woman, very feminine run. Kind of waddled.
Our witnesses in this case were tremendous. The witnesses' accounts giving us that evidence, they made the case.
Did you notice anything about footwear?
I noticed there were black shoes with a white sole that were flat-bottomed.
I believe a significant piece of circumstantial evidence was that Shauna was not wearing shoes when she was stopped.
She had no shoes on her feet?
None.
What were the weather conditions outside?
It was frigid. As she was driving home, Shawna Nelson had disposed of some of the evidence, the gun, the gown, but she still had on the shoes, and she realized that those shoes could be material evidence.
As I was going northbound on 65th Avenue, I noticed a single shoe, black in color, up along the snowbank in about the 1900 block, and as I continued north, I saw another black shoe by itself. They were about 80 yards in separation.
Let's talk about the shoes a little bit. Did you also examine and compare the DNA profiles developed from those 2 shoes?
Yes, I did. And to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, Shawna Nelson is the source of the major component of the DNA profile developed from these shoes.
Okay. And how are you employed?
I'm a bartender.
And after you got off of work, what'd you do?
I went out back to smoke a cigarette.
Did you hear anything unusual?
Couple pops. I thought it was gunfire.
Did you see anything unusual at that time?
I saw someone run down the alley, wearing all black, jogging. I thought it was a female.
What did you do after you heard these pops and you saw this person running down the alley?
I ran out past the shed and looked to where they had ran.
Were you able to see any vehicles out there?
I saw a truck. It was a Ford F-250. It took off down the alley without its lights on.
Did you speak with police officers at some time that evening?
Yes, I did.
They take us to exactly the location where they see this vehicle. So our field evidence technicians actually find a true roll of the tire, leaving a very good tire impression in this kind of snowy slush material in the alley, which our crime scene individuals later obtain a cast and photographs of that ultimately are used in trial.
Remember, this is not just a repetition of the same 1 foot long impression around the tire.
Expert testimony was able to match up the right rear tire of Ken Nelson's truck to the cast in the alley where the murderer jumped into that truck.
I found a stone hole in the cast, and I found that same stone in the exact precise portion and size in the tire. Only another tire of the same tread dimension, the same design, the same general condition of wear, with another stone in exactly the same position of the tire could have made it. It's highly probable, in my opinion, that this right rear tire made the impression that this cast represents.
The truck that she's driving that night is towed. A search of that truck reveals some live .40 caliber PNC brand ammunition.
Did you locate items of evidence that would corroborate witness accounts that there had been a shooting here?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury what items you recovered related to a shooting incident?
There was a spent bullet and 2 spent shell casings. They are PMC .40 caliber.
You see in that exhibit the shell casings that you swabbed for trace DNA?
Yes, I do.
And how many were there?
2.
Were you able to develop an interpretable DNA profile from those shell casings?
I did not develop an interpretable DNA profile from these items, except to note that the source indicated female origin.
Can you eliminate Ken Nelson as a source of the DNA on those shell casings?
Yes.
Can you eliminate Ignacio Garis?
Yes.
Can you eliminate Shawna Nelson?
No.
Did you do a GSR kit on the defendant?
Yes.
And explain to the jury what GSR is.
GSR stands for gunshot residue.
Gunshot residue just tells you that somebody was near where a gunshot was discharged or came into contact with a surface or an object after a gun was fired.
The results of the kit were positive for gunshot residue, and those were specifically samples taken from the right hand and the face.
Okay.
Is that the mask that the police showed you about a month after this incident?
Yes.
The major component of the DNA profile developed from the inside of the mask matched the DNA profile developed from Shawna Nelson.
I think we were all a little surprised that she took the stand.
Please state your name for the record.
Shawna Nelson.
The prosecution believed they had presented overwhelming evidence that Shawna Nelson murdered Heather Garis. But the defense had a wild card up its sleeve, Shawna Nelson herself. She was about to take the stand in her own defense. The question was whether she could convince a jury that she didn't do it.
Does the defense have any evidence to present?
Yes, Your Honor. We've called Shawna Nelson.
I would not be surprised if counsel had advised her not to testify, but I think Shawna, the master manipulator, believed she could manipulate the jury as well as anybody else.
Please state your name for the record.
Shawna Nelson.
Did you have anything to do with the death of Heather Garis?
No, I didn't.
Did you shoot her?
No.
So Shauna sits there throughout this 9-day trial. She hears all the evidence against her. She had a checklist of everything that she knew that she had to try to overcome for the prosecution's case. Her biggest obstacle is Michelle Moore.
Did your relationship with Michelle Moore become more than friendship?
Yes, it did.
Did it develop into an intimate relationship?
Yes, it did.
One of the bigger moments that jumped out was when Shawna Nelson alleged that her and Michelle Moore had an affair themselves. Nowhere was that ever in any of the affidavits.
Have you kept that relationship a secret?
Very much so.
And why?
None of this is stuff that I'm very proud of.
That was definitely a surprise to see that love triangle morph into an alleged square.
Did you own the mask that has been produced as an exhibit in this case that was found in your truck?
Yes.
Had, to your knowledge, Michelle Moore seen that mask?
At least on 3 separate occasions.
Okay, under what circumstances?
The first time, it was before Halloween.
And there was a couple times after that?
The 2 times after that were both in Ken's truck.
Shauna brings in Michelle, manipulates her, gets her to help out, and then later completely throws her under the bus and tries to blame this whole thing on her. In my opinion, you see that a lot with people who are narcissistic, and that comes from the lack of empathy. You know, it's very easy to use somebody and throw them away.
After leaving Jackson's Hole, what occurred?
I was driving Michelle home and told her that I no longer could have a sexual relationship with her, and that since I was trying to actually maybe finally be loyal to Ken, that I needed to completely fess up, and that I was going to go home and tell Ken also about my relationship with Michelle. And I told her I loved her, and that I still wanted to remain friends with her, but I couldn't keep lying to Ken. It was too much.
What was Michelle Moore's reaction to that?
She was very upset.
When Shauna eventually took to the stand, she talked about how Michelle Moore was trying to frame her because Michelle Moore was in love with her. She tried to pin it on Michelle Moore. She was saying that Michelle Moore was a spurned lover.
Did you, at this time or any time prior to January 23rd or on January 23rd, ever develop a plan to kill Heather Garis?
No, I didn't.
Tuesday, January 23rd, did you do anything in particular on that day?
All day long I had a headache, so I decided that I was going to try and relax. Kids are loud, so I asked Dylan specifically, if I please pay you $5, will you watch your brother and help your sister watch your brother? And he said yes.
Then what did you do?
I went into the bathroom. I started running my bath water, and then I decided that I wanted to get a bottle of wine.
So what did you do?
I went out. I already had my cell phone. I grabbed my key and went to get the shoes and realized that I had actually, in turn, put the shoes in our closet. So there weren't any shoes over there for me to put on.
Why didn't you go and get the shoes?
Because I had already locked the bedroom door and I was just trying to hurry.
Where did you go?
I went to College Green Liquor.
When do you believe you left the house?
It was around 6:05.
What do you recall happening next?
The next thing I remember is my phone ringing and kind of jolting me out of a daze. And I was in front of College Green Liquor. I had leaned over and my purse wasn't there. So I never even went into the liquor store.
Did you make it back home?
I didn't.
And there's been previous testimony about you being stopped. Is that how it occurred?
Yeah, pretty much.
There have been shoes that have been introduced in this case. Are they your shoes?
No,
Are they your size?
not even close.
You've heard testimony that DNA on those shoes have been identified as your DNA.
I have heard that.
Did you ever touch those shoes or wear those shoes to your knowledge?
I have never had any contact with those shoes.
Was there a gun in your truck on January 23rd?
No,
Did you have any other handgun on January 23rd?
no, I didn't.
She really didn't break on the stand. There wasn't certainly a Perry Mason moment. She didn't confess. She stuck with her story, despite all the holes in the logic.
Did you use any other handgun to shoot Heather Garis?
No, I didn't.
No further questions.
Would you please hand the verdict to the bailiff? We, the jury, find the defendant, Shawna Louise Nelson.
The prosecution and defense had rested in the Shawna Nelson murder trial. But did she do more harm than good on the stand? And did the jury buy it? The verdict wasn't far off, but first came the dramatic closing arguments.
Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about infidelity. The defendant is not on trial for being unfaithful to Ken Nelson. Ignacio Garis is not on trial for being unfaithful to Heather Garis. This case is about fidelity, ladies and gentlemen. Heather Garis being faithful. That's what this case is about. She was faithful to a husband who did nothing but cheat on her. She was faithful to a husband even after he told her he had fathered a child with Shawna Nelson. Heather Garis was executed because she was too faithful. She took the vow, till death us do part, too seriously. She believed in it. And the evidence shows the defendant believed it too. She believed Heather would be faithful till death, and so she killed her, ladies and gentlemen. That's what this case is about. Heather Garis being too faithful.
I was cognizant of the fact that this case was so sort of tawdry. I did not want the jury to go down rabbit holes about who was sleeping with whom. I wanted them to focus on the one true innocent victim, Heather Garis.
When Heather Garis was on her knees looking up into that mask of the Grim Reaper, she knew, ladies and gentlemen, she knew who was behind the mask. She knew it was the defendant. She knew she hadn't ruined anybody's life. But she knew the only person who believed that she had was the defendant. And the defendant said, "You ruined my life." And in the split seconds that Heather Garis had to remain on this earth, she knew that she was going to be murdered by the defendant. And the evidence shows, ladies and gentlemen, that Heather Garis was right.
I think it was a little under 6 hours before the jury reached a verdict.
Please be seated. I believe juror number 4 is the chief juror. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you please hand the verdict to the bailiff? We, the jury, find the defendant, Shawna Louise Nelson, guilty of count number 1, murder in the first degree. Is this your verdict? So say you and each and every one of you.
Shawna Nelson was a master manipulator. She manipulated her husband. She manipulated her best friend, Michelle Moore. She believed she could manipulate and outthink anybody. I think that led to her downfall.
The jury having reached the verdict of guilty, the matter comes on for sentencing. Ms. Nelson, do you have any statements to the court before I pass sentence?
No, I don't, sir.
The jury certainly has determined that you killed Heather Garis. You carried out this crime with great planning and deliberation, and Heather Garis did not deserve to die as a result of your acts. You deserve to serve every day of the sentence I am about to impose. And I sentence you to Colorado Department of Corrections for the remainder of your natural life, and without the possibility of parole. That concludes this matter.
Shawna Nelson told a local TV station after the trial, after she was convicted, that someone sure did a good job framing me.
Shawna Nelson had young children that were not going to see their mother again outside of a prison setting. That doesn't make you feel good, but you at least have relief that we stood up for Heather Garis.
Today, Shawna Nelson is incarcerated at Denver Women's Correctional Facility. Ken Nelson divorced Shawna and became the legal father of the son that she had during her affair with Ignacio Garis. Michelle Moore served her time in prison and was released in 2016. But sadly, there is one more tragedy associated with this case. The only child that Ignacio Garis and his murdered wife, Heather, had together died in 2015. The result of a car crash. Victoria Garis was just 17 years old, and she's buried with her mother, Heather. I'm Ashley Banfield. Thanks for watching.